Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're just waiting for a few more people to come in. There's quite a lot of interest today in Margaret Haverty's talk. And I'd like to just say good afternoon. You're all very welcome in this midwinter going to spring sort of day here in Berlin. I don't know where you are, but I hope you've got some sunshine. I can see some sunshine behind various different people's camera images there. Now, I would just put down a couple of ground rules. Please have your microphones off so that we don't have any unwarranted noise interfering with Margaret's presentation. If you want to ask a question later, you just put your hand up, or you can use the digital hand up system in the Zoom call. And my name is Thomas Bellew. I'm the head of public diplomacy here at the Embassy in Berlin, and I'm accompanied by my colleague Elias Ben-Manah, who will also moderate today's discussion. Well, it's really, we'll moderate just the questions that you come in and make sure that we spot you and bring you on board. Now, Margaret has very kindly joined us this afternoon to talk about, well, a number of things, and it's going to be about the Irishness, Irish in Germany, the Irish diaspora, and I'm really looking forward to our presentation. But before that, we just say that Margaret is a PhD student of Historical and Cultural Anthropology, and I hope I get this right, at the Ludwig Uhland Institute for Empirisches Kulturwissenschaft, Eberhard Karls Universität in Tübingen. But Margaret is from Rathfarnham, and she moved to Germany 6 years ago, 5 and a bit years ago, after finishing her degree in Germanic Studies at Trinity College in Dublin. So 2 semesters of Erasmus in Tübingen led her to a master's there and to work as a tour guide at Liechtenstein Castle. So it sounds like you're very very well engrossed in all things German, and you're coming from Ireland, so quite the mix. So for Margaret's doctoral dissertation, she's carrying out ethnographic research amongst the Irish community in Germany, and part of that has been interviewing a lot of individuals and participating in events, examining themes such as belonging and understanding of Irishness. Now, I don't think anybody wants to listen to me talk any further, and they would like to listen to Margaret. So Margaret, without any further ado, please take it away. Okay.
Thank you so much, Thomas, and thanks a million, Ilias, as well, for the invitation to speak to you all today at the Irish Friday Club. I'm just going to share my slides. 1 second. Can everyone see? Cool. Super. So thanks again for the invitation to join you all today. My name is Margaret Haverty, and I'm a doctoral student at the Ludwig Uhland Institute für Empirische Kulturwissenschaft, and I'm writing my dissertation on Irishness in Germany. This is a working title. I started my field research in March 2020, and I'm finished my field research. I'm currently in the analysis phase of my material, and I stand before the daunting task of having to write the dissertation. So I'm thrilled today to be with you all because I want to share a couple of insights into my research, and maybe we can touch on a few of my initial findings. But I think it would be nice maybe just to say a little bit of who I am and how I ended up here in Germany. As Thomas said, I was born in Rathfarnham. I grew up along the Dodder River, and I studied Germanic Studies and History in Trinity. And during that time, I was allowed to go on Erasmus to Tübingen. I'm sure some of you might be familiar with Tübingen. It's a beautiful, picturesque little university town in quite close to Stuttgart. And I fell in love with Tübingen, and I knew I wanted to do my master's degree there. But I was aware that I would need to get my German into shape because I wanted to study in German. I didn't actually really expect that my Schwäbisch would get so good, but that's how it happened. I ended up working at Schloss Liechtenstein. Perhaps some of you have visited it before. It's known as the Märchenschloss of Baden-Württemberg, so the fairy tale castle of Baden-Württemberg, auf der Alp, auf der Schwäbischen Alb in the local dialect, so on the Swabian Alp. Now, I didn't have a car, so I had to live at the castle. You can see on the left there, the side building, Gerobau, that's where I had my room. On the top floor, you can see there's like a little turret. Yeah, so every cliche was filled during my time there, but it was a fantastic experience and my colleagues were so welcoming and I just really got into the culture here. And so I decided to stay and I ended up moving to Stuttgart, where I now live with my husband. And then I started my studies of empirische Kulturwissenschaft at the Louis, as it's affectionately known, in Tübingen. And the institute is actually perched up on the farthest corner of the Schloss Hohen-Tübingen, so the castle in Tübingen. And you can see it there on the right with beautiful views down towards the River Neckar and across towards the Swabian Alb. And during my studies, I dealt with topics in the field of museumology. We actually completed an 18-month project where we conceptualized and ran an exhibition at the Landesmuseum. And I also looked at other areas such as diversity, cultural analysis of everyday life, material culture, migration, gender, archival work, and of course, the ethnographic methods of the discipline. So at the Institute, we like to say that we look at culture with a small c, not with a big C, Kultur mit dem kleinen K. So for us, culture is everything which is significant to us in our daily lives. So when someone says to me in an interview, that's just normal, that's what I do, that's where the ears prick up. Why does nobody question that normal? Why is that such a matter of course? What can we see in the small daily interactions which reflect bigger global trends? And in what ways do we invest meaning into seemingly unimportant objects? And in this way, we can unfold the deep complexity of our everyday lives and our understanding of the world. It was actually around that time that I set up the Irish language group in Stuttgart, the Circle Cora. It was actually around this time in 2018. And I suddenly then discovered a well-networked group of Irish speakers in Germany, which up until that point, I hadn't been aware of. And I was fascinated by this. So I wrote my master's thesis on Irish language conversation groups in Germany. And the Stuttgart group is still going. We're a small but strong group, and we welcome everybody who's has an interest in the language, an interest in the culture of Ireland, just wants to hear the language, and fluent speakers who are interested in having a conversation together in the local pub, O'Reilly's. So it was then after my master's that I decided to continue my field research in the area of the Irish diaspora in Germany. And this time I will be allowed to write my doctoral thesis in English, which is a great relief to me because I'm tired of having to try to translate the word grant into German. And in order to do my research, I received a scholarship from the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. And I also work as a freelance translator and a proofreader for the institutes where my supervisor, Professor Dr. Reinhard Jola, is head of. So maybe it would be good now to touch on a couple of the questions which I took into the field with me in March 2020. It's characteristic of ethnographic research not to go in with a single question, but to go in with a catalogue of questions. So here are a couple. Who is Irish living in Germany? So who considers themselves Irish living in Germany? How do they live out and interpret their Irishness in their daily lives? What impact did the global pandemic have on individuals' practices? And in what ways are belongings constructed? So maybe it would be nice to just let you know how I go about my research, and I use ethnographic methods. So this is basically a qualitative research approach. So there's no quantitative element to it at all. It's a purely qualitative picture. And I use, for example, semi-structured interviews, participant observation, which basically means I go along to events and I observe how topics like Irishness or belonging, migration are dealt with in situations. And this all culminates in a kind of deep hanging out, as Clifford Geertz termed it. So that's the way I induct myself into the field. And this results in hundreds of pages of field notes, field reports, transcripts, which are eventually analysed then during coding. So that's the stage that I'm in at the moment, or coming towards the end of. And I use grounded theory-like methods, meaning that my research is not deductive. I don't want to prove a hypothesis. This is against the ethos of ethnography. It's inductive. So I'm led by the material that emerges from the field in conversations. Of course, the pandemic threw a major spanner in the works for me. As much of the period of my field research, we faced strenges Kontaktverbot, so the inability to engage with people face to face. But this also meant that I had the chance to go online, and I carried out some digital ethnography. I'll show a little example of that shortly. So I've been very busy recently dealing with my very diverse material set, so almost 40 interviews and hundreds of pages of field notes, photographs, and my research diaries. I'd like to share with you a little excerpt from my research diary, just to give you a bit of an idea of the really fine-grained approach that I have to the field. This is actually an excerpt from November 2020. You might all recall the really hard winter lockdown. And just to remind everyone, all of my data is anonymized, so I use pseudonyms for the persons. So Aoife, I just have to move this out of the way quickly, sorry. So Aoife tells me how she speaks English to her baby and her husband speaks German to her. The child seems, however, to be picking up more German at the moment, Aoife feels. She says she has her little triumphs when the child says a word in English. She did, however, lose the battle on what the farmyard cockerel says. For the baby, he cries kikeriki and not cock-a-doodle-doo as he does in the English-speaking world. Aoife has to chuckle at this sound and how it is, in her opinion, clearly not the sound made by the cockerel. So this might seem a little bit trivial or insignificant, but to the ethnographic eye, it reveals a lot. For example, it gives an insight into the family life of parents from two cultural backgrounds raising a child in a country into which one of the parents was born or socialized. It reveals the subjective importance of passing down or passing on certain familiar concepts and ideas to the next generation. It gives insights into language usage by second-generation Irish persons, and it also shows the added layers of complexity of the emigration experience of an Irish person living in a non-Anglophone environment. So just maybe to recall the context in which this research took place, I went into the field basically the week after the pandemic broke out in Europe. And it caused, of course, great disruption to everyone's lives, and that includes the lives of qualitative social researchers. So my research is embedded in a kind of nest of crises and was coronafied. But the crises also reveal maybe previously hidden topics and themes, and crises, of course, show us what's important at the end of the day. So this photograph, you might recognize it. That's the arrivals area in Dublin Airport. And this photograph was shared with me by one research collaborator who made the journey to his family in Cork during that most uncertain times. So the picture for me very much encapsulates this strangeness, which many of the research collaborators describe their lives as being touched by, particularly towards the start of the pandemic. So the annual journey home has almost ritualistic status at times, with reports on news media from this very arrivals lounge. And in the Christmas period of 2019, 1.2 million people passed through Dublin Airport. Over the same period in 2020, 137,000 people passed through. So a massive cut in the lives of people who are used to traveling home. So that is a little bit about the context, but now I'd love to share with you a couple of my emerging themes that are coming out of the data at the moment, starting with care packages. I'm sure this is something you're familiar with, or you've heard of people receiving or received yourself. It doesn't have to be during the course of the pandemic, but they did gain another layer of importance over the pandemic. And during the strict lockdown and the Kontaktverbot, I used these care packages as a way to enter into the daily life experiences of the research collaborators. And they shared with me experiences about receiving and sending packages between Germany and Ireland, and the importance of these gestures to ameliorate a sense of isolation. And this was a creative way of dealing with the strain of the pandemic on their lives. And Dervla points out to me that never have we depended on the post more than this year. Normally it is Ryanair or Lufthansa that transports us and our goodies. This year An Post and DHL took over the role to save Christmas. So I saw goodies shared as an expression of solidarity and stashed away for rainy days. I also saw Christmas cards that turned up in February due to the problems with the post over Christmas when all the packages and letters were quarantined when the British mutation of the virus broke out. And a lot of these practices of consuming are seen by collaborators as uniquely Irish, and that reveals the ways in which belonging and a sense of home can be constructed also through capitalistic consumer practices as well as eating habits. Another topic, which of course is very prominent in the material, is that of mobility or lack thereof. Many of the interlocutors, they live what can be defined as transnational lifestyles. So that means that they live in 2 or more countries, either physically, socially, economically, or psychologically. And that's not exclusive to people who commute back and forth or travel on a regular basis. So it can be said that these people are connected closely to lives and social networks in Ireland, whilst also having close family relatives or their professions, their work and their homes on the continent. And during the COVID-19 crisis, this led to difficult feelings and tricky decisions, as of course, I'm sure many of us are aware of. It also raised questions around, for example, the morality of flying and the changing infrastructure of travel. I mentioned earlier that I did some digital ethnography. I looked at social media quite a lot during the very dark days of the lockdown in Germany. And perhaps some of you will recognize this meme, which started to do the rounds at that time. And for me, it's interesting, this meme, it depicts a sense of being locked out. And in a borderless Europe governed by the principles of freedom of movement, there was a sudden sense of this removal at Christmas. And it's important to note that there's been important work done with memes by cultural anthropologists and in the area of digital ethnography, also prior to the pandemic. But during the pandemic, the memes become part of daily life and they show humor and creativity in the face of difficulties. And I just show you this because I want to get across the range of qualitative material which I generate as an ethnographer and then analyze as an anthropologist. And this is part of my mixed methods approach, so all different kinds of material, that's important to my discipline. And just also to note, an interesting caveat sort of which came up is the sense of Ireland becoming an island again. There was a strong sense that the island was separated from the continent by real physical impediment of the sea. And we saw that when, for instance, other inner European migrants could get into a car, or if it was allowed in their country, into a train, whereas that's obviously not an option for Irish people living abroad who wish to return home. So another topic which very sadly and quite unexpectedly came up was that of the dreaded phone call, or the idea of death or loss at a distance. And the live stream funeral is a phenomenon of our time. And so I found it important to allow collaborators to share their experiences in this regard. And Afrik shared her thoughts on having taken part in a live stream funeral of a family member with me. Just move this out of the way, sorry. So while it was good to be able to watch it via the live stream, it was absolutely horrific at the same time. The whole thing of grieving together and of like a funeral and being with the people, I just think it's such a strong part of Irish culture. So to be sitting here on the couch, watching all the people that we love horribly upset, being upset ourselves, and then the end of the service comes, the live stream cuts and you're sitting in your house. So what's interesting here is the way Afrik connotes a very specific kind of Irish cultural practice surrounding death and loss, and how this is not compatible with the digital experience. And there's a great ambivalence here. It was both good and bad for her to take part in this live stream funeral. And unfortunately, considerations about mortality and death are something which hung over the interviews, and they're likely then to flow into the final dissertation. A final topic which I'd love to share with you, which is something I'm sort of working on at the moment, or examining in my material at the moment, and that's that of Irish traditions. So you may have noticed, or I'd be interested to know if you noticed, over the course of the pandemic, there was a proliferation of candles in Irish contexts on social media. Even the embassy had their candle lighting in the window. I saw on Christmas Eve 2020, and I had collaborators who confirmed that they also lit candles in the window. They received candles in care packages. There were candles lighting in remembrance of people we lost. And even there are, if I'm sure in your local Irish pub, if you go in, you will find candles in empty whiskey bottles and wax stripped all over them. So there's something about candles and the Irish emigrant experience which comes together. And I'm sure a lot of you will be aware of President Mary Robinson in the 1990s. She very much solidified this by introducing the light for the diaspora, which burns in the window of our Uachtaráin, and it's supposed to light the way home for Irish people living abroad. And so I would be interested to hear if this is something which people are aware of, and if there are, I basically examine the Irish traditions as a way to connect people to a place or to a feeling or to people. And this is something which I'm exploring at the moment, and I hope will form into a chapter in the dissertation. So that sort of leads me then to the next question: what is on the road ahead? I am finishing my analysis of my material, and I will be writing the dissertation, and I'm due to submit in March 2023. So that brings me to the end of my input for today. I'd just like to take the opportunity again to thank everybody for the invitation and to thank you all for joining on this Friday afternoon. Before I go, I'd love to leave you with a few questions to mull over in private or to discuss with friends, or even discuss in the discussion round afterwards. For example, how important or unimportant is your Irishness to you? What traditions do you practice? How has life in Germany changed for you over the years? And did the pandemic impact your daily life in Germany? So thank you very, very much to everyone. I would be thrilled, I would be delighted if people would stay in touch. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can drop me an email, or you can look for me on the University of Tübingen website. I might be finished my fieldwork, but I am always thrilled to discuss and talk about my findings. It's great when they're reflected back into the field and people can say, I don't know, or yes, I found that as well. So I appreciate all contact or emails or chats in the field as well. So I think that's me for now. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Margaret. That's a fascinating and well-received presentation. Thank you very much. I'm sure there are a lot of questions from a lot of people right now. You've stimulated a lot of people's thoughts, especially about the Irishness. Even in my own experience, I've been coming over and back to Germany for quite some time. I have two daughters who are half German, half Irish. So I see a lot of these things, like with the kiki kiri and the cock-a-doodle-doo. And even when you mentioned eating habits, I don't know if you've seen the by now famous Des Bishop sketch where he's talking about you can always spot the Irish person because they leave their food on the tray. No, they take their food off the tray, whereas every other culture leaves the food on the tray, so it's just easy to put back. And I've often noticed it. I never made it comical like he did. He has a talent. But it just goes to show those little nuances and whatnot and how we are spotted. You also mentioned there about how to translate the word grand. I don't know if you heard that the author Audrey McGee was on the radio over the weekend, just saying about how difficult it is to translate the word and expression grand into any other language. And there are so many different ways in which we can say grand. Now, I would actually open the floor up to everybody here if they'd like to ask a question. My question that I'd like to put to you is, it was during the pandemic that you were conducting most of this research. How did you do it? I mean, was it all just by Zoom, like what we're doing now, or did you actually physically get out and do some in the field research?
I would say it was a hybrid model. Because of course there were moments where it was permitted to interact with people, and then other moments where it was harder. So I did a mix of Zoom or Skype or team interviews, as well as telephone interviews and in-person interviews. Interviews are the easiest thing to do. They are the most adaptable to digital technologies. The participant observation is the harder bit. So I had to do a lot of digital ethnography, and that was basically involved checking out how people, research collaborators, were dealing with the pandemic, how they were changing their daily lives through a digital setting. So, I mean, look at us, we're online now. I would never have had the chance really to attend the Irish Friday Club unless I would put the 800 kilometers behind me. And at the end of the day, that's just become our lives. And it's important that research reflects that and doesn't stubbornly stand in the field and wait for people to come who are not going to come. So it's very, it had to be very adaptive.
I agree with you. It does have to be adaptive, and it's good that we have the technology that can actually cope with what's happening now. And it was very poignant when you spoke about, and you had in your slides there about the person who was affected by bereavement. They were bereft, and it's very true how we say, keep in contact, keep in touch. And then you were faced with having to talk to someone who's had that, and it's been replicated innumerably amongst a variety of different communities over the last 2 years, and it must have been very, very difficult to deal with in your own field of research.
Yeah, in a way, it was also. That's also important to note. I am, of course, part of the field which I research, so that has to be I have to be very reflective the entire time. How is this affecting me? What way is it? What questions am I drawn to answer, and which ones are important to answer? And so I didn't plan to talk about death or loss, but it's something which came from the collaborators that they wanted to talk about this. And it seemed very significant, especially because we have in Ireland, we have a specific way maybe of dealing with death and loss, particular practices, and they just evaporate into thin air in the digital setting. And there's something significant about that. So that's why I decided to dig further there.
No, it's a very important, and it adds value to what you're doing. And we have a question there from Patrick Partridge, and it's in relation to, did you research how Irish people celebrate St. Patrick's Day and Halloween? And if so, if you could tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the question, Patrick. St. Patrick's Day was, of course, the very first St. Patrick's Day was at the beginning of the pandemic. And the second St. Patrick's Day 2021 also took place under largely pandemic conditions. And what I thought was I did look at St. Patrick's Day. I attended the Mass in Munich, because that was actually the only in-person event which was permitted during the St. Patrick's Day celebrations. And of course, to see the parades go online was also fascinating. And what I also noticed about St. Patrick's Day, maybe people will be able to identify with this, I also felt like it became an occasion of solidarity, where people were sending shamrock emojis to each other and saying, I hope you're having a good day, or I hope you're doing well. It became sort of a centerpiece for holding together and identifying as Irish and creating a sense of belonging through the digital. So in WhatsApp groups, on Instagram, Facebook, and of course through the online parades. The Mass was also very interesting because it was so sparse. You were only allowed to have, I think, less than 100 people attend. And the organizers of that Mass, they know that they get up to 1,000 people attend that on a normal basis. So it was very shocking in a way to see the difference in normal times and pandemic St. Patrick's Day, but it still took place, and the Irish in Germany still tried and successfully managed to mark St. Patrick's Day. When it comes to Halloween, I've seen turnips carved, so as opposed to pumpkins, but I haven't done a specific case study on Halloween, more on St. Patrick's Day and on Christmas. And another, maybe just as another little insight, I also did a bit of a case study of the Late Late Toy Show last, not the most recent one, the one at the start of the pandemic, because that was used also as a way to connect the diaspora all over the world. You might remember there was a video sequence of all the children around the world, and people in Germany took part. And I thought that was very interesting that the toy show became the center point for the diaspora to connect. Yeah.
That's great. You mentioned the toy show. One of the highlights of my diplomatic career is actually the toy show that we had a public showing of at the embassy in 2019 before the pandemic. It was just beautiful.
Wow.
People singing along, and it was like being back home, and it was a real sense of home in it. And just on the turnips, it's interesting you mentioned the turnips, because of course turnips were the forerunner to the pumpkin. When the Irish diaspora when they emigrated to the States, they said, what else can we carve? Go big and grab the pumpkin. We're getting a lot of questions here on the chat. So let's just, I'll give you a few of them here.
Okay, cool.
So maybe I'll give them to you as a group. So did you research how Irish people are received in Germany in comparison to other nationalities? Does the GAA feature in your research? I would be interested in the role of the GAA played in helping the Irish in Germany to connect. And then, did you see a change in how much Irish people sought out other Irish people in Germany? You might assume that as people couldn't get home, they would be more interested in joining Irish or Irish language groups here.
Thank you for the questions. I'll start maybe with Fion's question. It's interesting, of course, there is the element of language, which plays a role in how the Irish people are received. In general, I have to say all of my participants had either very good German to almost fluent German. And of course, that is it's received very positively by the people that they engage with in day-to-day life. Another thing which I noticed in that vein is that some people actually told me that they would keep elements of their accent while speaking German in order to appeal to their conversation partners or in whatever social setting. The Irish have a certain level of cultural capital within Europe, and if I may say so, I believe that they are also able to use this cultural capital in order to get on well in their daily lives. That would be sort of a generalization, which I would say from the people who I spoke to, that they don't have as much difficulty, of course, in setting foot and getting on in Germany because of this. What the other, Colin, thank you for your question about the GAA. Of course, the GAA saw very difficult situation with the pandemic and the physical contact for both. To be honest, because of the lack of participant observation opportunities in GAA settings, the GAA will only feature on the side of my research. I spoke to experts in the field who told me obviously about the conditions pre-pandemic and the effects that the pandemic had on the GAA. But in general, what I noticed about the GAA and, for example, Irish language groups is they become a sort of an Anlaufstelle, a place where people can come to in order to connect to other people, not just necessarily Irish people, although that does play a big role, but also other people with migration experience, and that they can use these avenues, sport or language, as a way to talk about their experiences as immigrants abroad and to connect and to share resources as social resources as well as advice. Unfortunately, with the GAA, because of the lack of training and matches during the field research period, I didn't get to take part, and I have to admit, you don't want to see me swing a hurl. But it's also important for me that I don't focus on the big monoliths of Irish culture. So GAA and the language, they are important, but the pandemic showed me that there are other things which are also very significant to the Irish people living abroad, and that's what they also wanted to talk about in the interviews. Did I see a change? Definitely, and especially in the first summer, so that would be summer 2020, there was the desire to, when the contact for boat was lifted, that people wanted to get back together and to talk about everything that had happened. So, for example, the end of a flight connection between Stuttgart and Dublin, or when they were going to attempt to go home and how they would manage to quarantine in Ireland and deal with the family. And so there was this desire to find out how other people were managing it, so other Irish people in the same situation, and this sort of, again, this exchange of experience in order to support each other. And I think it forged new connections, the pandemic. It's always the same. In a crisis, you see what's important, and they needed this information and they needed this support and the solidarity. And so I did definitely notice, for example, in Irish language group, that this was a theme of conversations a lot. And I thought it was fascinating as well, words which I would never have thought of before in either German or Irish, and you're having to write down the vocabulary before you go to talk to people. So like the Irish for pandemic or the German for vaccine, and they become basically our general terminology for day-to-day life. I think, oh, there's one more. No, I think that was those were those three questions.
Yeah, I think you covered that there. Can we just check, is everybody happy with their questions being answered there? Or is there anybody want to put up their hand? Yeah, Sarah, you've got it. You've got your hand up there. By all means, please.
Hi there, Margaret. Excuse the chesty voice. Your research sounds absolutely fascinating. I put a little comment in the comment box there, but I should say I'm attending on behalf of Cross-Care Migrant Project. We're an NGO based in Dublin that's funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs to provide support to Irish people both leaving the country and also returning home. So this is extremely interesting to me. And I just wanted to know if you could speak a little bit more about your research collaborators. Were they long-term immigrants? Were they new to Germany? Yeah, that'd be very interesting to find out a little bit more.
Thank you, Sarah. I tried to cover as broad a base as possible. So I have everything from young professionals who are maybe here 4 or 5 years all the way up to I had participants who were over 30 years in Germany, 30, 35 years in Germany. And of course, it's very important to point out that there is a big difference in their experiences. I think it would be fair to say there's almost a graduated falling off of connections back to Ireland, the older or the longer somebody is in a place. And I want to point out that it's really important for me. I don't want to generalize about the Irish in Germany. Every single collaborator had a different experience, but there are similarities. And I think, for example, the younger or the people who were here less than 5 years, they noticed a very strong separation to Ireland, and not being able to get back was distressing at times. And for people who are more established, more social connections, maybe less social connections back to Ireland, it was easier to cope because they had their sports clubs, they had their families, they were very well established in their careers. And so it's hard to generalize about the experience, but the similarities were there due to the fact that the pandemic put them under intense pressure, I would say. But I have 36 interviews, 38 collaborators, and all ages are covered, apart from young children, of course.
Thank you. Thanks, Margaret. Has anybody else got any other questions? I know that Elias wants to come in with a question there.
There's one more question in the chat.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Elias.
Are long-time Irish becoming more German as time goes by? That's a really interesting one. There's definitely, it's like a melting together. And I think it's super important to point out, if I couldn't understand German, I couldn't have done this research, because the Irish code switch all the time. And for example, just one little caveat, you might be aware of Maultaschen. They're a Swabian speciality. And in a conversation with one research collaborator, he discussed how he loves Wyre sauce, and that Maultaschen and Wyre sauce is the best combination ever. So I can confirm I tried it out, all in honor of the research, of course. So it's just a small little example to show like that they are taking on German, I don't want to say German qualities, but maybe practices which would be associated with German people. On the other hand, there are sometimes conflicts. I remember a conversation about the word termin, appointment, and how in Ireland, termine or appointments wouldn't usually be scheduled for social interaction, whereas in Germany, you can use the word termin in order to say, I'll put a termin in my termin calendar to meet you for a cup of coffee, and that this is almost like a little clash. On the other hand, it's good to have, some participants found it good to have this structure, because it means that you have sort of more control over your social life. So there's both sides, Patrick, I would say. The embracing of certain German practices, and then the skepticism about other things, and getting used to that. One other thing, maybe just to add, I found it so interesting that this meeting is scheduled at 12:30. In Swabia, that's a no-go. I remember when I was working in Stuttgart, I once scheduled a meeting for 12:30. And got quite a lashback, because 12 o'clock, no later, that's when lunch break takes place in Swabia, which is very difficult. For me personally, I find a sandwich at 1 o'clock does the trick. So there are certain things like that which come up again and again, which show that it's very, very diverse. They either embrace certain things or they're not so happy about others.
Thank you. Let's just check to see if there's any more questions there. And we've a point here rather than a question, I think, from Dennis J. Buckley. It is very important to record those Irish and their experiences who arrived in Germany in the 1970s when Ireland joined the EEC. I don't know if that's something that you have come across in your research, people who were here from before the EEC. I think that's what Dennis is saying there. Have you,
Definitely. The thing is, it's very difficult to capture all of the experiences. They are so diverse, and I'm not a sociologist, so I don't want to paint a very broad picture. I want to zoom in on certain aspects, but Dennis makes a very important point. It's incomparable, the experience of the Irish immigrants who have come, say, in the last 10 years to during that period. It was also completely different structure of work, different social circles, completely different connection also to the island of Ireland. I remember it so clearly, a conversation with one gentleman who came towards the end of the late 70s, and he talked about having to have the coins ready to go down to the payphone, and you put in the amount of coins that you knew you could afford for that month, and that was it. The conversation had to end at that. And when you think about what we're used to today, I'm sure many of you are in family WhatsApp groups or friend WhatsApp groups, and messages, and this constant connection is going back and forth. It's incomparable to what people experienced when they came in the 70s. And I will definitely mention that in terms of the collaborators who spoke about that difference, but a comprehensive study on those persons is for the next doctorate, perhaps.
Thanks, Margaret. Can I ask you a question just in relation to, you said that the Irish have a cultural capital. In relation to how that's expressed or how it's perceived or how it's manifested by those you meet in Germany, what does it extend from? Is it in relation to our heritage? Is it in relation to our culture in Ireland, or is it in relation to our interaction with Germany over, especially in the last 100 years, so to speak? How when you say Irish have a cultural capital that we can play upon, or we can use to our benefit, how does that manifest every day, or in your experience?
Well, I would speak of it mainly in the context of almost. So I would say I've seen it in professional settings where, how can I put this? Basically, because Ireland has a reputation, or what their German colleagues or German conversation partners see as Irishness. So they see being jovial, they see funny interactions, or there are stereotypes there which basically inform the way the Germans, what they bring to the table and what they expect from an Irish person. And so there is a certain element of being able to capitalize on that, in that you can make good and strong social connections with people because you're a happy or an outgoing person. Now, I'm saying these are stereotypes, of course. And in that way, in professional settings, it's people in certain professions, it's good to be outgoing, to have a strong personality, to be lighthearted, but there's also the reputation of getting the job done as well. And there's something which appeals to, I hate saying Germans and Irish people, I have a bit of a problem with that, but it appeals to Germans in professional settings when they see an Irish person. And it's what I said also with the accent. Like, I've seen people who can speak flawless German put on an accent in order to remind people I'm Irish, or I'm not German. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I've actually even heard it from some people. Surprisingly, people saying, "Look, don't do your German flawlessly because you're kind of It's not quite insulting us, but we just like to hear the Irish twang. We just like to hear that Irish tone. So don't be just 100% pure German flawless accent. Now, it's coming to the end of the session. I'm going to have to head off here as well. And I'm sure we could talk to you ad infinitum. There's so much to cover. I just want to check before we do go if there are any more questions from anybody. We've got a few more in the chat here. Really interesting content. Thanks a million, Margaret. That's from Adrian. Siobhan says, fascinating. Thank you so much, Margaret. Then we have Dennis Buckley again. A busload of students came from Berlin to Brussels for European Parliament visit. All they were interested in was to visit a trad Irish music session. I think that's German students maybe. So lots of thank yous. And there was something else I was just going to ask you in relation to the candles. That's a long-standing tradition in Ireland, of course. I remember as a child being lifted up to the windowsill on Christmas Eve to light the candle. I was very, very young, by my father, and it's something that we keep doing. So with that, we'd say that, Margaret, you are shining a light, and you have lit the candle here in Ireland on Irish people in Germany. And we would like to actually present you with a gift. We'll have to post it to you. It's a book, Pub Life, it's called, and it's about Irish pub owners in Germany. And it's a series of, it's a photo book about the various different pub owners, the pub workers, and where they all are across Germany. Of course, we couldn't get every single pub, but again, they are like cultural ambassadors, so to speak. Wow. So I would just Elias wants to ask a question or come in there, if at all possible. Margaret?
Yes, thank you very much, Thomas. And thank you very much to you, Margaret, for this very lucid and very illuminating presentation. I found it was very easy to follow, and it still dealt with a lot of complex topics and developments that, as we can see, directly affect the lives of a lot of people. And with that in mind, I remember you mentioning that people in Ireland or people connected to Ireland were having the feeling that the country is becoming an island again within the context of the pandemic. And I was wondering, how does Brexit play into that, especially for the Irish diaspora in Germany? Because in a sense, Brexit and the pandemic were incidental to each other. So thank you.
Thanks, Elias, for the question. Brexit is sort of in a way, a ghost that haunts me throughout the field research. I've tried on numerous occasions to crack into what the Irish feel about Brexit, and it doesn't come up. Unless I force it in conversations, it doesn't seem to come up, which in a way, they always teach us that silences also speak. Positively or negatively, I think we can leave that one open. But I feel, for example, with Brexit, the one moment where I did come up in my field research was there's a local English shop in Stuttgart which had to change suppliers from British goods to Irish goods due to problems importing. And that was the moment where everybody rushed down to the local English shop and found Fanta and Tato and Barry's tea. And that was the only moment where I noticed Brexit. So I'm not sure if Brexit has an impact on this feeling of being an island. I felt like it was almost this, the physical separation with the grounding of the flights, which thrust Ireland into this island status again. But as I say, Brexit is something which haunts me because I feel like it should be talked about, and I haven't figured out why it's not so often mentioned, unless we're talking about wire sauce.
Thank you very much, Margaret.
Thank you, Elias.
Thank you. Thanks, Margaret. And with that, I think we should bid adieu to everybody so they can get back to their Swabian lunch late, get your Swabian noodles, and Uriga Eliga Bajer, Kaimajation the end of Kinship. a soccer, Nice Jenny. So I would just say thank you very much. And Rachel had a question there. What's the name of the book? I think the book you're asking about is The Colony by Audrey McGee, where she participated in our Bridget's Fest at the embassy recently. We had an excerpt from the book translated into German, and then she was interviewed on Radio 1 RTE, and she just said it's amazing how difficult it is to translate the word grand into other languages. And it's interesting that you pulled it up there as well, Margaret. So maybe we should just say that this was a grand event, this was a grand affair, and thank you very much. We wish you the very best in your grand future. So
thank you all so much. It was a real pleasure, and I wish you all a lovely weekend.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Slán go fóill gur mágat.